Hello, chums. With REANIMAL basically right around the corner at this point, I finally played Little Nightmares. And even though this is my first time playing the game, technically, I have always had a deep appreciation for Little Nightmares as a game, and obviously the series as a whole. I remember in particular watching Jacksepticeye play the original game. Awesome pull, I know. Like, back when the game initially came out, and it's kind of fucking me up that is almost 9 years ago now, actually. I watched him play the base game, and then I was just so excited to watch him play the DLC as well. And I think it was my first exposure to a game like this, and obviously since then, I've played games like Limbo and Inside, which are often compared to Little Nightmares. They are quite similar. But like, to me, back then, horror was like Five Nights at Freddy's jump scares and like Slender Man. Find my page to Slender Man. And I mean, like, I'm a Nintendo guy. The closest I got to horror was Luigi's Mansion. But even to little me watching funny YouTuber man play this game, the style and aesthetics and just the atmosphere, it kind of just grew on me immediately. I was so enamored with this game that I had never played and had no access to because it wasn't on anything that I had at the time. And I didn't even remember how much of a gap there was between Little Nightmares 1 and 2. The first one came out in 2017, and the next one was in 2021, which is nuts to me because for that entire time I was probably actively thinking about the first game. And I want to say they revealed Little Nightmares 2 around maybe 2019 kind of period, and I remember just waiting to see Jacksepticeye play it again, and I was seated when he did. And I'm yet to play the second one, and I haven't really gone back to rewatch him play it, so my memory of what happens in that game is a little bit fuzzy, but I remember kind of the main bits. But yeah, anyways, the point, I played the first game finally, and it is always kind of a magical feeling. I feel like it's something that a lot of people who are, I suppose, kind of close to my age and kind of grew up with to 2010s YouTube, that feeling of finally playing a game that you remember watching someone else play years ago. I had that feeling when I played Gmod for the first time. I used to fucking watch Gliche Gaming. Another awesome pull. I used to watch his Gmod content, and I thought it was just so funny. And it's one of the earliest memories I have of me being like, I want to do that. And I promise I'll talk about the actual game. But yeah, just getting to the title screen and hearing the music and remembering the music, despite having not seen this game being played in literally years, was just, and it's such an awesome main theme that I am undoubtedly using at this part of the video. That's just so, it's just emotional, man. And I think at that point, I finally remembered how much Little Nightmares actually shaped my brain back in the day. But yeah, I kind of want to just talk about the game, having finally played it for myself, because I think I'd be doing me from 9 years ago a good justice. As you can probably tell, this is not formatted in any specific way. I'm just going to talk about some things that I thought were very good about the game, very interesting, stuff that I think is worth talking about, and I want to talk about the series as a whole, but I'll get to that later. I genuinely think that Little Nightmares is so unbelievably evergreen as a video game experience. Like I was saying before, it was kind of my introduction to this sort of genre of horror that relies more heavily on the atmosphere and the environment to be scary, and obviously monster designs and stuff. And one thing that I have always appreciated even since then is the fact that nothing is ever outright said. At least when Little Nightmares came out, the first game exclusively, there were next to no answers about pretty much any big burning question that you would have. You're a child that is in a situation, and that's pretty much all you know for the entire game. Just conveying ideas and implying things with no dialogue, no written text or anything, just character movements, is something that I'm just so fascinated by. And playing the game for myself in modern day, it was something that I could really fully appreciate now that I could, now that I was in control and was taking my own time with the game. The way things move as pretty much the one way to communicate, other than the environment, I'm talking about the characters themselves, the one way to communicate what they are is just awesome. I remember very distinctly in one segment when you're hiding from the janitor and he's like walking around, he picks up like a spoon and he's kind of just like playing with it, and he has a whole like collection of dolls and stuff, and it kind of just shows this weird kind of private moment with him that you as a character are not supposed to be seeing, but the player can. And like, it's just kind of freaky. You just like see him doing this weird unexplainable thing kind of almost ritualistically, like it's something that he does often, and you aren't privy to that. You don't know why he's doing anything he's doing. And of course, just the janitor in general is such an iconic character in the series. He's like the first big monster that you encounter in all of the games. He's obviously, his big spindly fucking arms are a big part of his character, but I was able to appreciate how he just moved, like his head specifically, and like his jaw and his teeth. He always has like this kind of like, I don't know if you could call it an underbite, but I feel like he always has this kind of mouth position in a specific way, and he always like turns his head and kind of like cracks his bones a lot. And his movements are often like super slow, with whenever you see him wrapping up the kids and putting them on like the hooks to send them up to the chefs, his movements are all like very slow. Not quite precise. I would say he's a little bit jittery, but it's like this is a process that he does, and you can't do anything except watch him do it. Another thing kind of in this vein was with the chefs. Something that I never realized when watching someone else play the game was that like sometimes they will stop to like cough. Which, you know, sounds like kind of a stupid thing, but I think, like, especially when you start to see it as a video game, you know, the monsters obviously have, like, movement patterns. You're supposed to sneak around them a lot of the time, so it's like, they'll go from this table to this table to this table. They have a very defined pattern, but sometimes that pattern can be broken. I'm not sure if it's, like, a scripted thing or if it just randomly happens, but sometimes they'll just be, like, walking, and then they'll stop for a second and then start coughing, like, really violently and then keep moving. I think just small details like that to make the monsters a little bit more human is just something that kind of goes a long way. And, you know, jumping around a lot, I know, but like that core concept of Little Nightmares, having all of the monsters be human in some kind of way, as distorted as they are, still having them be human is something that I just find so cool. I'll talk more about it later, but it's kind of a problem I have with Little Nightmares 3 and with the direction that story kind of went in, or with the monsters anyway. But the first game is so, like, I think it's just so perfectly isolated. You have this setting, the Maw, which is a massive boat, but you have zero context for how the world works. You have zero context as to where you actually are. You just have this one concrete defined setting. You never exit it, except for, I guess, the end, technically. And you have all of the monsters who are warped versions of adults. And I'm pretty sure a big part of the monsters' designs is that they're supposed to be something that children would be scared of. I know, especially in Little Nightmares 2, you kind of see that in a more general sense. You have monsters that are the teacher and the doctor, you know, things that kids would be scared of. And they all just have these characteristics that I think make them just so charming as characters. Like, I already talked about the janitor and how he's like super weird in his like processes and stuff, and he has like a very particular way of doing things. And then you have this segment with the TV where he seems almost like hypnotized by it, and he completely stops for a minute, because whenever you're trying to escape the janitor, you have to make a lot of noise somewhere else to lure him because he's blind, and you kind of assume that turning on the TV is the same thing. He'll run to it and turn it off, but he doesn't. He kind of just sits there and he like slouches over at it for a minute, and it's like, you have no context as to why he's doing that, but I think it's just a nice little like characterization thing. And you have the twin chefs, which I completely forgot until I replayed it. They do everything together. They have their beds together, and then they also have their toilets together for competitive shitting. And just like the little detail of their bodies looking like leather and their faces being like really malformed, and then you realize, whether through their scratching animation or just by like looking at their necks, you realize is that their faces are masks, and you don't actually ever see what their true faces look like. And of course you have the lady, which I think is kind of a different sort of horror compared to the previous monsters. She's kind of more scary because of her status and like her stance. She's always standing still watching over things. Because especially since the segment before you get to the lady, the main threat are the people in the maw, and they're like ravenous, animalistic people that are eating what they can, and as soon as they see you, they drop everything and chase after you, hoping to eat you. And then you're immediately landed into her quarters, where she's kind of just chilling. She's like brushing her hair and singing, and you have to sneak past her. And one thing, this is one of my favorite parts of the game, I think. It is skipping ahead quite a bit, but you have to sneak past the lady to get a key from her room, and you have to like shatter something. And throughout the game, you're kind of conditioned to think like whenever you make a noise, the monster will make an audio cue to show that they heard you, and then will like yelp and chase into you, and the music will pick up. But what they do here is whenever you break the I think it's like a pot or something that the key is in. And I know with me at least, my first thought was that I had to go run and hide under the bed, but there is no audio cue. So I was kind of left sitting there for a second thinking, is she gonna come in and check if I made a noise? And then I leave the room and see that she's already gone. And I think really just like turning that like learned instinct to run and hide when you make a noise, turning that on its head and just having it be like, oh, but she's different. That was so impactful for me. It really sold the idea of the lady being like, oh, she knows that you're there already. And I like it because I mean, like lore wise, I'm not actually really caught up on what the lady is. I think a big theory is that because a big part of Little Nightmares 2 is the time loop thing, and the lady might be 6 in some time loop thing. I don't know if that's even confirmed or if that's still just like speculation, but if you looked at it that way, I suppose it would mean that she literally would know that you would be there, and by hearing the noise, she just fucks off because she knows that it's like, well, it's time. It adds a lot of tension to the final encounter, I think, because oddly enough, it reminded me of Asgore in Undertale, where it kind of feels like it's more of like a meeting of just like, well, you know, we gotta do what we gotta do, than like a sort of like, oh, I'm going to kill you. I think Six and the lady have a more personal relationship on purpose. You're never really told what their deal is, but there's always allusions comparing and contrasting the two throughout the game, and their final meeting being so like different compared to the other monsters, and her kind of in general not really being scary in the same way that they are, where she doesn't really have monstrous qualities. She's just kind of like an authority. She's just a powerful person. And you know, I think a big theory back in the day was that she was Six's mother, which honestly, with how she's presented, I can see how that conclusion would be drawn, because I mean, obviously she's like the owner of the maw, she's the lady of the maw, so she has like a lot of presence, and you could read that as like a motherly thing, where because she could be seen as like a stern mom, where she's just like, yeah, cut the bullshit, I know why you're here. And a part of the story that I think is so awesome is thinking about it as sort of like a loop, because I remember a big discussion back in the day was when you find the one unshattered mirror that's small enough for you to be able to pick up, people were obviously like, why did she not break that mirror if the only way she can be killed is by seeing herself in a mirror? Is she stupid? But like, if the Lady of the Maw is a cycle and Six is always doomed to repeat that cycle, it would make sense. And I also noticed that whenever you go to eat the lady at the end, she kind of changes her position when you get closer to her. It kind of looks like she is like leaning her neck towards you, or like she's like moving so you get a better angle at it. So I mean, obviously I don't know how outdated some of this stuff is. I'm kind of just talking about the things I noticed that might kind of link to that. But to kind of step back into like a more general overview of the game, I think it does such a crazy good job at just like showing the corruption of Six. The whole hunger thing was so important that it's almost what the game was called. And like, Six is such a huge part of this game. Obviously, I think Six is Little Nightmares, and again, I said I'll save it for later, but I still will. But like, Little Nightmares 3, it kind of felt a little void because, you know, a little someone was missing. Because a huge part, at least like some of the most memorable moments in Little Nightmares 1 and 2, it's just the fucked up shit that Six does. And I think it's so interesting when you're playing the game and the idea of the player and the protagonist, and you have this obvious big moment in the game is when the gnome offers Six the sausage and she tosses it aside and eats the gnome instead. And that's kind of like the big turnaround point where a lot of players would be like, what the fuck did you do that for? It's just such a cool way to show it, because obviously as the player of the game, you don't want to eat the gnome, because throughout the game they've been established as like they're like cute little friends that you can make friends with them, which is what builds up this moment to be as impactful as it is. And I think in the way I saw it, at least, they kind of convey the strength of the hunger and like how powerful it is over Six by having it obviously combat with the player's intentions. You're conditioned to think that the gnomes are just like awesome, like the one thing that's not a threat in the entire game. So whenever you watch Six eat it of her own accord, and then you're just left to sit with that for a minute before continuing the game, is such a powerful moment. And I think Little Nightmares 1 and 2 share that sense of just like such emotion through the characters, because you have no idea why Six is there. You're kind of just working with the assumption that she's trying to escape, and then they introduce the hunger mechanic, which makes you think, okay, maybe this is something to do with it. And then she goes beyond any action that you think that she would have carried out and becomes irredeemable in a way. I mean, even before Little Nightmares 2, which was a big Six moment, we could say, it's just like really sad to watch, because we have no idea why she did that. It potentially something to do with the hunger growing and her needing to eat something that was alive, potentially, because then the next thing she eats is the lady as well. And it's stuff like that I mean is so beautiful, with having no dialogue, having nothing be outright said. It's my favorite part of the game, I think, is just leaving the player to think what they will think. Because at the end of the day, we are not Six, we are just playing as her. And I think Little Nightmares 2 also kind of helps to show that by her not being playable in that game. She's just like your companion. And like that moment where she eats the gnome is so just completely unforgettable. It's such an incredible part of that game, and it shows a lot about like human greed and stuff, and how far people can fall, and just like showing this really fucked up lawless world where they're eating like human meat, and you have like these big gluttonous people indulging in like this boat that was designed to torture. And you have this little child who is wearing a yellow raincoat, you know, yellow, happy, hopeful, and watching her become corrupted through the environment is something that's just so cool. And I love ending the game with her escaping the maw, because that was probably what a lot of people thought was the original goal, but by the end of it you don't even know if you've escaped, because Six isn't trying to board any boat that's coming by to pick her up or anything. She's just kind of standing there watching over everything that she's conquered. And you know, I could sit here talking about this game all day. The character designs are excellent. The sound design as well is always something that's so good in these games. One thing that I especially loved, having played it for myself, is specifically when you can hear someone else or something else in another room or like above you, is such a cool just feeling that makes the maw as an environment feel like an actual place, like with multiple rooms and like places where people will sleep and eat and just do whatever. And of course there's the DLC as well, which I think is a little bit less impressive, but it does have one of the most emotional moments, I think, in any video game. Skipping right to the end, learning that the gnome that Six eats is the protagonist of the DLC. Seeing their like parallel progressions to get to that moment is so awesome. And I think ending just on the scene of the gnome looking at the sausage with like the music and the pan out is so awesome. Something that the first two games do so incredibly is just establishing this world, but not really outright saying what the rules are, what any of it means, just having it exist, and like that's it. Kind of a problem that I have more so with the more recent things about Little Nightmares is obviously they want to expand the world, they want to expand the universe, and by doing that you kind of have to explain some things, which I mean I at least think kind of defeats the purpose. Like you have Little Nightmares 3, which is kind of supposed to just be like an expansion of the universe rather than much of a story on its own. And you have like a bunch of other, like I think you have like a podcast and comics and stuff, and it's just kind of becoming what I don't think Little Nightmares should be. I think a big characteristic of the series is that it just kind of is what it is. I think whenever you start looking for definitive answers, you're kind of doing it wrong. Obviously, having some answers is fine. I mean, I think a criticism of this game could be that they kind of don't really elaborate on much at all. I'm happy that for the most part, a lot of that is kind of just like side content that is not really related to the games at all. But then also Little Nightmares 3 kind of requires you to have outside knowledge to understand what the fuck the story actually is. And I mean, like, there's enough videos about Little Nightmares 3 talking about how it's disappointing and whatever, and that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I'm mainly focusing on the first game, but it's kind of, I'm bringing it up to sort of highlight how special the first game is in its narrative. And like, I'm sure there's plenty of people that like Little Nightmares 3. I like some of the ideas that are in that game, and if you like the story in that game, that's perfectly fine. I just think that I personally prefer what the original game was going for, with just a completely isolated story. You're just one child in this big ship, and shit just kind of happens that, as a player spectating the world from the other side of the screen, we simply just fully cannot understand. I think it's about just showing the horrors of humanity, and seeing the world as a child is, you know, it's pretty damn scary. And there's a lot of like ways you could read the characters and the settings and stuff as being sort of a depiction of like childhood trauma and just how scary the world can be when you are that small. And it's something that I really noticed with playing the game, is that obviously, like, when children are in distress, naturally I think a normal response would be to like cry. But because of like just how awful the fictional world of Little Nightmares is, and just, you know, how normalized, I guess, the terrible aspects of it are, like 6 will survive a traumatic moment and like won't even bat an eye. Like, there's not really any time to be scared when everything is scary. And obviously, outside of very specific moments where you are able to fight back against the monsters in like usually the final moment where you have to deal with them, you are entirely helpless. There's nothing you can do against these guys. And I think having the setting be the Maw, just this big vessel in the middle of the ocean, kind of also helps to deliver that kind of like claustrophobic feeling of just like, yeah, you're trapped in here with them. One thing actually when playing the game is that I realized that it's actually a lot shorter than I remembered it being. It felt like there was like just a section of the game that was missing. It felt like it was supposed to go from the chefs to some other monster to like the people and then to the lady. But I feel like the game ends pretty quickly after you escape the chefs. The little segments that you do after that, feel like they don't last as long. I mean, I think the game is like fine pace-wise, but I think there could have been like a little something more, and I guess that's why the DLC was made. But the DLC isn't exactly super impressive to me outside of the first chapter, because I think that having the second and third releases of it just be like, oh, it's the janitor again, and oh, it's the lady again, is sort of a little boring. And I mean, on criticisms, I guess, since I'm here, I think the game kind of controls like shit sometimes. I'm just not a super big fan of how 6 feels to control, and like, sometimes it feels super clunky when you're trying to like climb something or carry a thing or just like run away. But like, honestly, with everything else that I talked about, I think Little Nightmares 1 is near perfect. And it is incredibly hard to believe that it is almost 9 years old when making this video. And I guess, especially with like the controls and stuff, and I guess with how it's paced a little bit, it does kind of start to show its age. And, you know, talking about this kind of just makes me more excited for REANIMAL. Just the idea of having a modern Tarsier game is tantalizing. But yeah, that was Little Nightmares. I'm really sorry that this video was kind of just, it's not structured at all. Like, more so than even some of my other videos. I really was just kind of going all over the place talking about things that I liked. And I probably didn't mention many specifics, but I sort of wanted to just talk about the things I liked having played the game for the first time. And I mean, maybe I'll talk about REANIMAL when I play that. But yeah, that's just what I thought about Little Nightmares. And, you know, it's, again, super fulfilling to have finally played it after all of this time. The world of Little Nightmares and how weird and fucky the stories can be is something that is just always gonna be so memorable. And, you know, I love when horror has a little bit of mystery. I think it keeps the conversation alive for a very long time. I'm not really a big fan of whenever there are explicit answers to things and trying to make sense of things that aren't supposed to make sense. And like not knowing what like the main characters are thinking at all, not knowing what anyone or anything is thinking, not knowing why anything is where it is, but having it still make sense in the context of that world. There's so much coming together in these experiences that I think is just so beautiful, and I think that Little Nightmares 1 and 2 are going to be games that are talked about for a very, very long time, and I hope that Reanimal is also remembered in that vein. But yeah, if you listen to me talk about spoilers for Little Nightmares for the entire runtime and you haven't played it, I would highly recommend it. I think it's an incredible game. It is so great, especially in horror. I think it's a definite must play. But yeah, thank you for watching. I don't really know how to end this. I think it's pretty fucked up that Reanimal is a game key card. Yeah, that pissed me off.